Hey everybody, this is my 55-gallon angelfish tank, and today I just want to talk about a topic that has been on my mind for the last few days, and I'm not even really sure why it's been on my mind, but it has. And that is when fish die, especially after doing a water change. I have lost a few fish recently. In fact, I lost one in this tank last night. My male tiger barb was swimming around sort of sideways up near the surface, and you know the deal, it just wasn't going to make it through the night more or less. And when I've come down this morning, I've not been able to find it anywhere, so its little body is probably tucked away under those rocks somewhere in some little nook or cranny, and not really a big deal. If I could find its body, I would certainly remove it, but a very small fish like that in a 55-gallon tank is not going to pose any real threat to my nitrogen cycle, or it's not going to blow up a huge ammonia spike or anything like that. So that's not really a concern. But what has been bugging me is, over the years, and I'm not singling any one person out, I've heard this many times by many different people, I hear people say a lot of times when they find dead fish, or someone will post a video saying like, why did my fish die? You will see in the comment section below lots and lots of people reassuring them that don't worry, sometimes fish just die. I hear that a lot. Sometimes fish just die. And it always makes me scratch my head. I don't know why people say that. What they're really saying is that I don't know what the cause of death is, so I'm just going to shrug, excuse me, and say, sometimes fish just die. If you woke up in the morning and your dog was dead, would you say, pets, yeah, sometimes dogs just die? Well, of course not. You may not know what killed it, but you would assume something killed it. It had a heart attack, it had a stroke, it threw a blood clot, it ate some poisonous food, who knows? But there was a cause of death. Dogs don't simply die for no reason. Neither do fish. And speaking of heart attacks, that is another one that I hear from time to time. When fish die after water changes, excuse me, I don't know why I have such a frog in my throat this morning. After water changes, sometimes fish will die, and I have heard people actually say that sometimes fish have heart attacks because of the water change. Now, I'm assuming what they mean is that it was such a harrowing ordeal and such a terrifying water change that the fish literally had a heart attack from the stress. Think about that for a few minutes. I've been catching fish my whole life. I'm an angler, and I go out and I go fishing, and I trick fish into biting a metal hook, and I yank it into their face, and I reel them in, and I hold them up, and I dig in their face with a pair of pliers to get the hook out, and I take pictures of them, I throw them back in the water, and they swim away. And depending on the species, you might very well catch that same fish 5 minutes later. So if that ordeal was not enough to put the fish off of that kind of food, rather than have it bite the same bait 5 minutes later, I really don't see how a routine water change, especially on fish that have been in a tank, where, this is not their first water change and suddenly they're dying now. Why? No. That water change you just didn't terrify your fish to death. What usually happens during a water change and when you have fish death afterwards, it's because you've made some change to the water parameters in your tank, and it may not be any water parameters you're aware of, whether you test for them or not. You might have shifted your total dissolved solids radically, and the sudden change in osmoregulation would have a big impact on the fish, and fish can die because of that. Speaking of osmoregulation, you could actually change your water's hardness very dramatically when you do a large water change. You can shift the pH wildly when you do a large water change. There's a lot of things that can happen when you do water changes that can actually be a cause of death for the fish. So just because somebody doesn't know what the cause of death is doesn't mean they just died, and it doesn't mean that they had a heart attack during their very scary water change. I just don't think that that's a realistic possibility. More than likely, it was some water parameter changed during the water change. Now, fish that die, just like mine did yesterday, there was no water change at all, and the fish just was looking fine the day before, and then suddenly it wasn't looking fine. that is usually an indication of it being in water that is not the proper hardness. Water hardness is very important for fish. It has to do with their osmoregulation, but it's one of those things. I know a lot of things are called the silent killer, but water hardness really is the silent and potentially slow killer. Ammonia will kill your fish in a matter of a couple days, but you can check for ammonia, and if you've got ammonia in your tank, you can say, okay, well, that killed my fish. But water hardness is a little different. If your fish die all of a sudden, and that's what a fish that dies from being in improper water hardness will look like, they'll look just fine right up until they don't, and then they're dead. And you might say, okay, well, I'm going to check my water hardness, and you've got a water hardness of 7. Well, what does that tell you? You know, you need to know the fish. You need to know what hardness the fish should be in. And maybe you've got a water hardness of 5, but it says the fish should be anywhere between 8 and 12. Well, keeping it in water that's a little too soft for it's not going to kill it like a poison would, the way ammonia would. But a month down the road, that fish may die. That fish may live a year and then die. You know, it's taxing its system by being in water that's not right for it. So it's not going to kill it outright. But over time, you're just beating on the kidneys, and you're beating on all the other little mechanisms that help osmoregulation, the little venules in their gills that pull in salt, or sodium ions, I should say. All of these little things are working overtime when they're in water that's too hard for them, or water that's too soft for them. Some fish are more flexible than others. You know, there's a lot going on in the physiology of a fish. So them dying suddenly does not mean they died mysteriously. It just means that they died from something that you don't know what the cause of. So I don't know why that's been bugging me so much, but it really bothers me when I hear people say that fish just die for no apparent reason. That's really, really just not true, any more so than it would be for any other animal. Something causes their death. I hate mysteries personally, and when I do find a fish that just died for some reason, I really like to find out why, and I usually wind up testing my water and so on and so forth. But I've done that so much over the years, I don't really have to test it anymore. I kind of know what my water parameters are coming out of my tap and what's in my tanks and that sort of thing. And on that note, I will wrap this video up by saying I am going to be doing a video here very shortly about water testing in general, what I test for, what types of test kits I use, why I test for various things, how often, and that sort of thing. I did have a viewer ask me, you know, what I test for in my water and why and how often and so on and so forth. So I am going to go over a little bit of that in an upcoming video, so make sure you're subscribed. You don't want to miss that. And again, this was nothing in particular, just a few thoughts on the idea that fish don't just die for no reason. Just because you don't know the reason doesn't mean there isn't one. It just means you don't know the reason. But fish die from something, just like any other animal. So thanks for watching. Don't know whether that made any sense or cleared anything up or whatever, but I just felt like I needed to get that off my chest. So don't forget, this is my angelfish tank. Thanks again for watching. I'll see you real soon in the next one.